Good afternoon, everyone in Asia, and good morning to our friends in London. I'm very excited today because we have a lot of good-looking people on screen today. So thank you for joining us. Welcome to B Current Impact Investments' third Fusion Talk. My name is Lawrence Yan, and I am a climate tech venture capitalist and also your moderator for today's webinar. Thank you to CK for your invitation to host this event once again. To new friends who are joining us for the first time, Fusion Talk is organized by B Current Impact Investment on a bi-monthly basis. B Current Impact Investment is the first venture capital in Taiwan that is fully dedicated to support social entrepreneurs who are trying to solve social issues with socially minded capital. So the Fusion Talk is launched by B Current for the purpose of bridging world-class social and climate technology innovators from all over the world. In Taiwan, we have major corporations, startup entrepreneurs, and investors, and hopefully this information can be helpful for everyone involved. Now, summer 2022 can be labeled as a year or perhaps the first year of climate extremes. Many regions experience extreme drought and other regions experience extreme flood. Acknowledgement for climate crisis may be at its all-time high today. So we can no longer ignore the fact that the climate is changing. Last week, there is a very, very sobering news that went under the radar. Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Venture Fund is adding climate adaptation into the investment focus. Okay, this is also something I've been telling friends for the past few months, is that climate technology innovation started with phase one, which is carbon emission reduction. And then we realized that it's no longer enough to just reduce emission. At some point, we have to start capturing them and burying them into the ground. So that's where phase two came in play with direct air capture and filter. All right. But what we are experiencing today is making us shift into phase three. So we're seeing more and more startups and innovators going into adaptation mode, where we realize that we may be forced to face the climate change ahead of us. So we have to find technologies that can help us better prepare ourselves for the coming, whatever that may come going forward. So how do we use these technology to adapt to new environments and mitigate these impact and damages? Okay, so our discussion topic today is climate risk data analysis for a better tomorrow. Okay, so when Will sent me today's discussion topic, I know I have my work cut out for me. All right, the hardest part about moderating today's webinar is how to discuss the subject and have everyone walk away with gleaming optimism. I try not to make this a doomsday scenario for everyone, but to find that silver lining, to find that technology is able to help us navigate through all these issues ahead of us. Okay, so I'm glad that I don't have to have this answer to myself. We have three remarkable guests with us this afternoon who can shed a light on how climate risk data analysis can help prepare us for some of the climate challenges ahead. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today's discussion. First, we are honored to have with us Dr. Claire Burke from ClimateX. ClimateX is a climate risk data and analysis company based in London. And I will have her introduce herself a little bit later on. Okay. Second, we have Mr. Rahul Parekh, principal from 2150 Venture Capital, also based in London. And last but not least, Taiwan's very own Dr. Su from the Research Center of Environmental Change in Taiwan. Okay, so may I first invite Dr. Burke to unmute your mic. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Burke. Can you give us a quick 3-minute introduction to yourself, what ClimateX does, and also your journey to finding your passion in climate tech protection and preservation?
Gosh, where to even start? Hi, nice to meet you all. So I'm Claire. I am head of science at ClimateX. I lead our sort of science strategy and everything that goes into understanding physical risk of climate change that we provide. I originally started out my life in physics and astronomy. I have a PhD in astrophysics. After I finished my PhD, I wondered if I could be using my science powers for something good and moved over to climate change. I worked at the UK Met Office, working to understand how climate change will impact extreme weather events and how they will become more frequent or more powerful. I've worked in several roles around climate science, climate change, and using remote sensing, data science, and machine learning to understand how climate impacts society and nature as well. At ClimateX, I lead the science team. Where at ClimateX, we are looking at asset-specific climate intelligence, so that is at the building or infrastructure level. And we tell our clients what climate change might do to their assets. So how will your buildings be impacted by the effects of climate change? And that's not just flooding, it also includes sea level rise, landslides, subsidence, storms, heat waves, droughts, fires, all of the different types of hazards that climate change can present to physical buildings. And we don't just stop at the physical risk, we also look at then how will your bottom line be affected by this? How much will the damage to buildings cost, and how much will that affect your business infrastructure and your profits at the end of the day?
Great, thank you. Yeah, you pretty much spelled out all of the doomsday scenario for us in 3 sentences. All right, we'll come to the solutions later on. Just hang tight. All right, so second, I'm also very looking forward to hearing Rahul's story. So Rahul was an equities trader. He turned an entrepreneur. He had a successful exit and is now helping other aspiring climate tech founders to build their businesses. So Rahul, could you also give us a quick 3-minute introduction to yourself, what 2150 does, its focus, and just quickly how you found yourself in the space of climate tech investment?
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, and thanks for the great introduction. So my name's Rahul. I'm based in London with venture capital fund 2150. So 2150 is a global fund. We're investing in early stage companies. We're focused on sustainability in the urban environment. So we're backing businesses that are changing the way cities are designed, constructed, powered. And we've invested in some transformative tech companies. We're not looking for unicorns, we're looking for gigacorns. So companies that can lower CO2 by over 1 billion tons per year while still being commercially successful. And we tend to invest in companies that are post-revenue, because we have a platform of strategic investors. They have over 200 million meters squared of real estate under management. They've set pretty aggressive net zero goals. They're very mission aligned with us, and they want to help early stage companies scale. And so we can facilitate that process, curate great technologies, and then invest between 5 and 15 million as an initial check across most kind of climate and urban tech sectors. And something on my personal background, after spending quite a few years in banking, I moved into venture capital, and I really loved the pace of that industry, and decided to go on an entrepreneurial journey myself and start up a tech company. And after we sold that company, I had planned to come back into venture capital, and I really, really loved it. And I knew I could kind of give back a little bit more than I could have kind of in terms of value add than I could have before, having been through that journey of a founder. And I was really excited to get this opportunity at 2150 a couple of years ago, because the mission statement was fantastic. And there was, at the time, there was very little kind of scale up stage capital in Europe for climate tech companies. And so, for me, when I was coming back into venture, the decision was between, do I go into a generalist fund and look for the next big dating app, or do I go and do something a bit more meaningful? And for me, like the decision was really obvious, and I've not regretted it one bit. And we're in an incredible industry where not only can we create big impact, but actually we can create commercially successful companies. So it's really exciting. The challenge is that we do have to deal with this big problem that's already presented itself. Just in terms of kind of carbon removal and mitigation, that's not enough. We're going to have to adapt to the climate change that's already happening. it's great that more and more funds, investment managers, governments, everyone is kind of waking up to that fact. And so, now we can really focus on finding the right businesses and supporting them in terms of growth and scale to make an impact.
Great. Just to go on tangent a little bit, Rahul. So tell us a little bit more about the business you started. What business is it? What's the application? And, going from technology into climate technology, a lot of people feel like hey, a traditional intern technology or application is much more scalable than climate tech. What do you have to say to that after having been in both worlds?
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely a lot of parallels and there's a lot of new things to learn. So for me personally, when I was initially investing in venture, I was spending a lot of time looking at kind of urban mobile on-demand companies. So companies that wanted to become the Uber of everything. And this is 2015. And that was a massive thing. Can you have anything at the touch of a button on your smartphone? That's much more prevalent today. At the time, 7 years ago, this was kind of a relatively new thing. And I really wanted to build a business in that space. And so I decided to start a food tech company that was doing just that. And then we found that we were building fantastic technology, but there were companies out there like Uber Eats and Deliveroo and Just Eat and Delivery Hero and all of these big names that you know today that were raising so much capital that there was no way we could compete. So we decided to actually utilize our technology instead and provide those types of companies and many others with our technology. And so we became a SaaS product, an enterprise tech company, selling our technology to others. And the parallels with kind of what we see today, and particularly in terms of 2150, is that there is potential to have big impact through both software solutions and the digital layer of climate change, and hardware deep tech solutions where we're creating new technologies and new products that can be significantly more energy efficient today. And on the software side, for example, we see 40% of carbon emissions come from buildings, right? And mostly from energy use in those buildings. And so just by adjusting the temperature in a very, very small way. So for example, by turning off your heating system for a couple of hours, you can have 0.5% impact on the temperature of the building. So relatively negligible impact on the temperature of the building, but have huge impact on the energy efficiency of that building because you've saved 2 hours of energy use. And so just by using really simple software to manage the heating system in a building, you can suddenly create quite meaningful impact, something like 20 to 30% of impact on your energy efficiency of that building in terms of operating emissions. And so we see that actually on the software side, we can actually have a kind of meaningful impact from climate tech. Yeah. But going back to your question, there's a lot we also need to do on the hardware side too. I don't think it's just a digital problem.
Yeah, thank you. As a climate tech venture capitalist, I think we always swing between extremely pessimistic and extremely optimistic, and I just experienced one of those swings in the past 5 minutes. All right, thank you, Rahul. Next, Dr. Su. So if Dr. Burke and Rahul can tell us more about what's going on in the world and what the future is going to look like. Dr. Su, we rely on you to tell us what's going on with Taiwan and what's going to become of Taiwan, which is going to be likely what a lot of these Asian islands will similarly experience as well. So Dr. Su, could you also give us a very quick introduction to your work and what you guys do at the Center of Climate Change? Dr. Su, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I was trained in atmospheric science and I had a PhD working on climate in the Department of Atmospheric Science, University of Washington, United States. So I'm currently CEO of Anthropogenic Climate Change Center under Research Center for Environmental Changes, Academia Sinica. So in this center, we try to understand and quantify the impact of anthropogenic global warming on extreme climate change, high impact weather in East Asia and Taiwan. I guess relative to other speakers or commentators, we are more in academic side. So we actually develop a so-called Earth systems science Earth system model to project our global and East Asia climate change. They use a very high resolution model that's tropical cyclone resolving to assess its impact on East Asia and on Taiwan. So in addition to that, we are working with other institutes and universities to assess the impact of extreme climate and high impact weathers on natural disaster, water resources, agriculture, forest, fishery, ecology, and public health, and wind and solar energy, and finance, and many things as you can expect. And currently, we're conducting a project, a 3-year project, actually from 2021 to 2023, study on climate change risk assessment for business. Okay, so we have this project because there's a need for climate change data for preparing the TCFD report. Okay, so there's an urgent need from many private industries. So, but currently we, the government or our public area cannot yet provide enough climate change impact data for the use of these private sectors. So, that's why we conduct this project. So we use a high resolution climate change data to implement risk assessment data for Taiwanese corporate. So basically, we are trying to, in addition to develop some methodology and provide data, we actually try to construct an open data and information platform, okay, for the industrial climate change risk assessment. So this Taiwanese corporate can use this data to disclose climate-related financial risk. So that's the major purpose of this study. And actually, most of our members in the project, we are relatively new in this area. So we are most of us are climate scientists and also a researcher in finance. But we try to use our knowledge to provide data to make this data useful for the private corporate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Su. I'm not sure if Dr. Berg or Rahul has been to Taiwan or Asia much, but on the state side, in the United States, on the East Coast, you have the hurricanes. On the West Coast, you have the earthquakes. In Taiwan, we have the best of both. So for us, it is very important to be able to forecast and understand how the climate is shifting and how that will impact our livelihoods going forward. Okay, so for the remainder of the discussion, I will separate it into 2 parts. Data analytics in climate risk year 2022 and data analytics in climate risk year 2030. Okay, in short, where we are now, where its applications, where it is helping us combat changing climate, and also where we see these the role of these data play in the future and how it could become a part of our everyday lifestyle. Okay, because I think people are still trying to understand the importance of data and the analysis to how, like, our government, our corporates are going to make hard choices going forward. So to start us off, 2022, Dr. Berg, could you please share with us where ClimateX current predictive tool is at in terms of functions and accuracy, and how it has already helped ClimateX's customers in both tangible and intangible ways?
Okay, so ClimateX came about through this need for climate risk data and analytics. We were largely driven by the recent regulatory requirements that have come out in the UK, in Europe, now in America, and around the world as well, that all large and listed firms must disclose their risk to climate change. And we were founded by, our two founders come from the finance sector, so they're very much aware of what is needed to go into that area. But the challenge with climate change and climate risk is that the way you model it is slightly different to a lot of what the industry is used to. We're not using statistically based models that draw a line through the trends in the past to predict the future. We know the future will be different to the past because we are doing different things as a society to the atmosphere. So this requires a whole new way of looking at risk and a whole new set of models and a whole new set of expertise to understand. The way that we approach this is that we say, if you are a bank or a large firm, you don't need to have that risk in-house. We will that intelligence in-house. We will provide that expertise for you. We will do all the sciencey bits, and then we will deliver the data in a way that is meaningful to your business. And this can be everything from a risk rating, A to F. You know, this building has an A rating. It is safe from the impacts of climate change today. This building has an F rating, and it's because of flooding, or it's because it's at risk of subsidence, or it's at risk of typhoons. And if you know what the source of the risk is, then you can take steps to adapt to this or to mitigate that risk. Presently, so we want to talk about what we can do today and what we expect to be able to do in 2030, or do we want to know about what we expect to be able to help businesses achieve in their planning for 2020?
Yeah, I think like today, how are you helping your customers? You know, whether customers are financial institutions, are they government branches, who are you working with, and how is your data helping them with your decisions?
Most of our clients are in the sort of finance and investment space. If you imagine things like mortgage lenders, if they want to know whether or not they should lend a mortgage on a building, and if that building will be severely damaged and the person who they're lending the mortgage to will default on the mortgage. Property investment, also real estate, where should and shouldn't you be building? The way that we have helped them so far is twofold. So one, if you own a building and you want to mitigate any damage to that building, you need to know what you're at risk from. The other is in meeting regulatory requirements and understanding climate risk disclosure. These regulatory requirements obviously have to be met, and they have to be disclosed in the way that the regulator demands and is meaningful to the business itself. So we can tell you at present and all the way up to 2100 what your climate risk will be under different types of emission scenarios, low and high emissions, all the way down to individual assets or across your entire portfolio. Identify where that areas of highest risk are, both geographically and in terms of what sort of assets you own. We can then put this into a sort of pre-generated report that you can deliver immediately to the regulator, or you can dig down as much as you like into the details of what asset is at risk from what type of hazard, and where you should be putting your mitigation and resilience efforts.
Right. So according to your data, what are the top 3 threats to assets? Is flooding one of the top 3? Is wildfire one of the top 3? Which ones would you label as the most dangerous to us all at this point?
It depends where you are in the world. In the UK, for example, flooding is our most financially expensive risk. I imagine that is probably also the case in Taiwan, especially given the exposure to typhoons that you have there as well. Right. As you said earlier, you also have the risk from tectonic activity, earthquakes, and the like. Tectonic activity can lead to instability in the ground, which means that your buildings, you have to probably well prepared for this in Taiwan, to be honest. You probably already have reinforced foundations for things like subsiding ground as a result of that. But climate change can impact this through changing weather patterns, not just typhoons, but also if you have more rain, then the ground can become more loose, and that can lead to more landslides and more subsidence. For Taiwan, I think obviously the annually most expensive impacts will be from typhoons and associated flooding with that. I'm not sure actually if Taiwan has a risk from fire. Again, it depends exactly where you are in the world. Our climate intelligence is location specific. So we know that if you are in California, for example, fire is at extreme risk. If you are in the UK, flooding and windstorms are extreme risk. If you're on the East Coast of the United States, you're looking at hurricanes and flooding. So it really depends where you are. And that is why location-specific intelligence is important. A lot of the type of global climate models that Dr. Xu is used to using will give you very coarse resolution predictions. So you're looking at a 50-kilometer square box. And if you're looking at 50 kilometer squares, that's not really giving you very location-specific intelligence. And if you're just averaging these over the entire world, you're not getting much intelligence in terms of what is actually important to you. This is where we like to go a step further. We like to say, okay, well, what is actually inside this box? Can we re-simulate the models at a scale that's important to you, that's relevant to you? Can we really say which of these hazards is most important and most impactful to your business?
Right. And so we know that, for analysis, data input is super important. What do we have? Is there a bottleneck right now today? Is there like a part of the input that is hard to collect at this point? We know we're collecting data from the satellites, we're collecting data from the local sensors and data. But is there like a bottleneck for us to get better data or clearer data to help our prediction even more clear at this point?
From the scientific perspective, we pulled together all of this different satellite data and climate model data and simulations of flood models and things like that. For us, the biggest challenge is knowing what our future looks like in terms of emissions and what those emissions pathways will mean for the weather. Historically, within climate science, we have produced some emissions pathways that we think are scientifically interesting. And only recently, with the new regulation in the industry, has industry started to ask, actually, these are the pathways that are important to us. These are the pathways that we believe our governments will commit to cutting their emissions. This gives us uncertainty in the projections because we don't know which pathway we are actually on in terms of our society. We can say, if we go down a pathway of this much emissions, this is what the weather will probably look like. And we're not talking a weather forecast like, should you take an umbrella to work on the 15th of May 2050? We're talking about the personality of the weather. How many days will you have heavy rain? How many days will it be hot? And so we can say, given this scenario, this is what the future will look like, but we don't know which of these scenarios the truth will actually, our society will actually lead us down. And that's possibly the biggest responsibility.
Thank you. I kind of feel like the nature has a full arsenal ready for us. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Burke. Now, Rahul, looking for answers and solutions. So you are looking at a lot of these software and technologies that can basically help us as well combat climate change. Are there anything that you see that's extremely fascinating, exciting, that you see that could impact our lifestyle today and tomorrow?
Yeah, so I think thinking specifically about kind of data analytics and data intelligence, I think that there are much smarter ways to deploy capital across all types of infrastructure investments using data, which includes climate risk modeling, but also many other things. I think the thing we need to bear in mind, at least what I always think about, is that climate change disproportionately impacts the poor and the poorer societies. Right. And you see that in emerging economies, fires in Brazil, floods in Pakistan, heat waves in India. You know that in those countries, you don't necessarily have the right infrastructure. But even in developing markets, even in developed markets, you have the same problem that climate change is impacting infrastructure in a way that disproportionately impacts the poor. For example, you have power outages in areas that need it the most, right? Where they don't have easy access to other forms of heating. Or you have increased eviction risk and food insecurity in certain areas through impact on climate change. And so what I think we need to do is use some of these climate risk models, but also kind of more widely data analytics to improve our infrastructure investments. Like right now, if you go to a utility and you say, hey, how are you thinking about investment in the grid? They'll tell you that what they want to do is they want to avoid power outages in general. And so they want to increase grid capacity in any areas where there is a risk of power outages. What they don't do is think about where those outages are occurring, and who's being impacted the most by it. And what they think about is just the number of people that are being impacted rather than the status of those people. And so I think what we need to do is we need to find technologies that kind of interlayer climate risk data, but also other types of data that we have. So for example, eviction risk data, we can easily get access to. Food insecurity data, we can get access to. Where people are living, and the kind of a quality of life assessment in that area. There's a lot of like kind of interlocking information that you can put together and then create products that allow utilities and governments, for example, to think about how they invest in infrastructure in the most appropriate way. So that's where I think that there is a huge potential to have big impact. And then the other one would be in terms of planning for cities. So we're doing a lot of planning for cities across the world. Where do we develop new, not just kind of new buildings, but whole areas of a city, right? How do we develop those? And if we can develop them in areas that reduce transport emissions, for example, and again, we need risk data and risk models to be able to do that, because it's a very holistic view. Then actually we can have a meaningful impact that way as well. So I think there's a number of areas where I think, kind of climate tech, climate risk, data analytics companies within, kind of broader climate tech can have big impact.
Rahul, you're right on spot. I recall if it was Buffett or somebody who said that it's not enough just to predict the rain, but you have to build the ark. But today it's going to rain everywhere, but we have to know where to build the ark first. And we do have limited resources to basically put out the fire. So we have to know where to put in the preventative processes in place. So thank you. I think that's right on spot. Dr. Su, going to you is, so what are your thoughts on the current progress from Taiwan's technology perspective? We know you're building models and you're looking into data for predictions. But in terms of technology, in terms of whether it is machine learning, artificial intelligence, it is data assessment, where are we in terms of Taiwan's development? And who's taking the lead? Is it government? Is it major corporations? Is it startups? And who are the users? Could you please kind of share with us? Dr. Shu, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the government taking the lead. Actually, our Ministry of Science and Technology to support a project called TCCIP, that's a Taiwan Climate Change Information Projection and Adaptation Knowledge Platform. Sorry about a very long name, okay? And they has been working on historical data in Taiwan and also try to project the future climate change and its impact on Taiwan. So they use the data from like so-called CMIP 5 and CMIP 6, and they project the climate change in Taiwan in very high resolution, like on temporal speaking is daily data, or someone even tried to come up with hourly projection, and the spatial resolution is has been in 1 kilometer and 5 kilometers. It's very necessary because if you come to Taiwan, we have this high-rising mountain, and the island is very small, so we need a very high-resolution climate change data. So they have been working on that for many years, and they have produced climate change information based on different scenarios like RCP, SSP, or warming scenario like 1.5 degrees C, 2 degrees C, and 4 degrees C. And in addition to that, but those data are mostly temperature and precipitation. Others are much more difficult to do. Currently, they try to work on the strong winds and or even solar radiation or humidity, but those are much more difficult to project with a much larger bias and error. And they also produce based on the temperature and the precipitation data, they also produce like hazard and impact maps, but unfortunately not in digital data yet. Okay, because they consider that is probably too sensitive to be released. Okay, some of you probably can understand why. Okay, so they have lots of maps for agriculture, flooding, sloping land, water resources, coast, public health, and fishery, but only on selected items, not in a very consistent way, because there are still a lot of impact study need to be done. Okay, so actually, who is has been using the data? The first is currently the government, right? Then the researchers, and then recently some private company, because they need to prepare or release a TCFD report. So now they try to use their climate change data, or even use their hazard and impact maps to complete their TCFD report. But frankly speaking, there's still a big need, or cry for open data. You know, the data open for the climate change information, and especially on those data of high sensitivity. Okay, and those data sometimes the government is not really willing to release as easily as possible, and so and also for example, people are now care a lot about TCFD, but we still need a national plan or a data platform in a systematic way to provide related climate-related data for TCFD assessment. Okay, so yeah, so there has been some activity and some research has been going on for like for a decade, but we need to open the data as much and as rapidly or quickly as possible. That's what the people and the private corporates need.
Completely agree. Data transparency. Hopefully, going forward, there will be less red tapes. But of course, it's a very dangerous game we're playing with. Okay, so now let us walk into the time machine and walk out the other end in year 2030. Okay, so Dr. Burke, so what are you seeing in 2030? What has the world become? What role do you see climate risk playing in Earth in 2030? And what will Climate X be doing for us in 2030?
With my very optimistic hat on, I would say by 2030, we will have cut all of our emissions and everything will be looking bright for our futures. The reality of that may end up being slightly different. So the sort of fundamental fact with climate change is that we often hear like extreme weather will become the norm. But the truth is that extreme weather will continue to get more extreme and more frequent until we completely cut all of our emissions. So we have a deadline at 2030 to have cut all of our emissions if we want to make this goal of 1.5 degrees of warming. Maybe we'll make that, maybe we won't. If we don't make it, the extreme weather we expect in future will be even more extreme than we see today. So obviously we will continue at Climate X to provide our climate risk projections for the different futures that we might expect. But in terms of the future that we might look at, we're not just looking at managing the catastrophe, we're also looking at potential opportunities. So while obviously we want to do our best to build resilience against the impacts of climate change, there will also be new opportunities that open up. As tragic as it is that we will lose a lot of sea ice around the North Pole because the world will be warmer, this also means that shipping lanes will open up across the North Pole. If you have the shipping lane open across the North Pole, you no longer have to send large shipping vessels all the way around Africa to get between Europe and Asia. And this actually reduces the number of ships you need to have in your circuit, and it could cut the emissions from that sector by 1/3. So on one hand, you have an opportunity to reduce your emissions, and on the other hand, you have this increase in need for resilience. So that's one type of opportunity that we see here. The way that climate change can impact things means that where you place your fisheries will need to change, because the populations of fish will migrate to the areas of water that's the temperature that they're used to. This will probably mean they're further north. This will open some opportunities for some areas, and it will mean that different areas need to look for different opportunities. In the UK, for example, if we expect the south of England to be warmer, then the climate will be similar to parts of France where they grow grapes. So we can start growing wine in the UK. If there are parts of sort of, I would say, like Northern Europe and Northern Asia that will have more opportunities on fishing different varieties of fish that it couldn't previously, because their populations would normally prefer the south. So these are the kind of things that we will be looking at Climate X, as well as building resilience, finding where your opportunities could be and what it is you should be building for and changing your infrastructure towards.
So funny, because I'm from Vancouver, so you know, I'm telling friends to buy real estate in Canada, because Canada is relatively climate change proof. At some point, Alaska may be the new Seattle, and Vancouver may be the new California. So if that's where we're going. Thank you. So similarly, Rahul, you're standing at the heart of Linden right now. So what are you seeing in 2030? What is software doing for us in Linden 2030? Where is all the climate risk data analysis coming in play? And also, are there a lot of cutting edge software applications for climate change solution? A couple that excites you the most that could be massive game changers for us in 2030.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. And Claire, that was a hugely optimistic view of the future, given what we probably have ahead of us. But I think in terms of speaking specifically about the UK, I think one of the challenges that the UK specifically has is that the policy response in the UK has been quite weak in terms of decarbonisation. So if you compare that to the EU, for example, you know, France has set a really high bar on emissions performance of new construction. Germany's got this Building Energy Act, which bans the installation of kind of monofuel boilers by 2026 in all instances. And the UK just has like one of the least ambitious targets in terms of the phase out of things like fossil fuel boilers in the home. So I think that needs to change, and we need some urgency around that if we really want to see kind of much faster adoption of assets to decarbonize the home and commercial buildings today, given that, you know, as I mentioned, that we have 30% of emissions coming from, you know, buildings and energy use there. So I think, you know, one of the other things that I think is important in terms of getting there is, like, we know kind of, you know, obviously at 2150 we think about a lot about kind of electrification of buildings, and that doesn't happen on a property by property level. Like in the next 20 years, we're going to have 2 billion new homes built, right? So we need huge innovation in cities overall, and new real estate with kind of lower embodied emissions, reductions in energy usage across buildings. And so we need to deploy some of the solutions on a kind of portfolio-wide basis or a city-wide basis. So you can have, for example, more impact on energy efficiency if you think about efficiency across groups of homes rather than just one. And so we need much more interaction between the stakeholders. It's a kind of multidisciplinary problem. So kind of communities, building owners, you know, prop tech and climate tech companies, utilities, governments. And that, I think, is one thing that's really missing today, is that when we come and kind of bring in like the climate risk angle, climate risk is only useful if you have all the stakeholders working together to solve the problem. Because otherwise, if your governments and urban planners are not willing to listen to climate scientists, and you know, maybe only willing to listen to a sort of small faction of them, rather than actually a lot of these really fantastic companies like Climate X and others that are developing really smart tools in order to do this in an efficient way, then I think you don't actually have the level of impact that you need to have. So thinking forward to the future, I think what I would like to see is much more focused on how we utilize this new technology and the ability to have more. Right? I think we can do much more with geospatial data. We can do much more with drones. There needs to be a lot of regulatory changes in the drone tech space in order to actually utilize them more. So there's a lot more there could be a lot more availability of cleaner data in order to make decisions. And then the trust that needs to be placed in some of these early stage companies that, yes, don't have a huge history, but actually are really innovating. And we see that as in kind of VC, right? Like they're really innovating and moving very quickly. And so that, across those stakeholders, particularly in our area, where in the kind of building sector, you tend to find that like the big real asset owners are relatively slow to adopt new technology. And so in doing so, they miss out on the ability to use some of these great early stage companies that can help them understand the climate risk of their portfolios much faster than, say, the typical consulting firms that they might, they might sign up to do that. And then the last thing I would say is that I think there needs to be a big change in terms of reporting. I think you need to have mandatory reporting of climate risk, which doesn't exist today. I think until we understand the scale of the problem, then I don't think we can solve it.
Thank you. Rahul, staying with you. So if there's one technology right now that kind of excites you the most, you don't have to disclose the name or anything, but something you could share with us on that point?
Yeah, you mean in general or specifically
in general, or
general. So I think, like, for me, the most exciting technologies are ones that can actually be super transformative in industries that are heavily polluting. So, for example, the cement and steel industry, that cement accounts for 8% of the world's CO2 emissions, and it's growing. Steel almost as much as that, and it's growing, right? Because there's so much new construction. So there are technologies today that are still very nascent. One of them is biocement, so green cement. So leveraging the use of natural microorganisms to create cement at ambient temperatures with zero CO2. Right? If you could scale up that technology, and you can't today, right, because it's too expensive to get it to scale. But if you could scale up that technology, you could then wipe billions of tons of CO2 that would be emitted in the future. You could wipe that out completely. And so those are the technologies that we are kind of very excited about. That has to be coupled with technologies that can be deployed today, of course. There's a company in our portfolio called Biomason that's a green cement company, but there are many others that are trying to tackle this problem too.
Great. Okay, so Dr. Su, going back to you. So you're in Taiwan 2030. So what is it we need to do? What technology do we today need to adopt for Taiwan to be 2030 ready? What are some promising technologies that you see that gets you excited about?
Okay, that's a big question for every people in Taiwan, also for our government. As you know, that we only decide to pursue the net zero pathway by 2050 only in March this year. And actually, frankly speaking, Taiwan is relatively slow and in making this decision. So for the past 20 to 30 years, we have done very little in terms of carbon reduction or related technology, and we have not think too much about the adaptation technology or the necessity of the climate change adaptation. So what we need to do, for example, we have set a goal for 2050 to be net zero, right? But so far we have not had the goal for 2030 yet. Okay, as we know that UN we have to cut the emission by 45% by 2030, but we do not know how in Taiwan, although we set a goal by 2050. Okay, so what we need urgently is to have a workable and well-planned pathway or policy, the policy to achieve this pathway. How can we cut the emission as quickly as possible? And in addition to that, actually, that worries me a lot is because people are not talking a lot about mitigation. And sometimes people forget about adaptation, actually. Okay, adaptation has been discussed much less in Taiwan. And I keep reminding people that because I'm kind of pessimistic about the 2030. I think we are going to exceed the 1.5 degrees C. Okay, and Taiwan is going to be much hotter. And we had a projection that if we follow the most severe scenario, we will not have winter in Taiwan by 2060s. So you can imagine how much impact that can be on our agriculture, our ecology, on our public health, on everything, even on our electricity use. Okay, so I guess so as I would say that okay, we need to have a clear, workable policy to achieve our net zero pathway. And in addition to that, we need a well-planned adaptation plan. And in addition to that, we need to know as quickly as possible and as much as possible that how the warming future, even by, for example, 2 degrees C, that's probably, we are going to exceed that sometime in the mid-century. Okay, if it's warmer than 2 degrees C, and what's the impact on Taiwan? We know the possible impact on the precipitation and the temperature, but we know very little about water resources, natural disaster like flooding, and like the impact on ecology, on our agriculture, water resources, and not to mention about the impact on our industry and financial sector. In addition to that, Taiwan is under a lot of pressure from the European country or from the US because Taiwan is our economy rely mainly on the export. Okay, so every item we export actually its carbon footprint will be counted, and that's the price we have to pay. Okay, so that's a big adaptation need for our company, even like a big company, especially like a big company like a TCMC, okay, TSMC, and they need that kind of very clear policy and measure very clearly. And in the future, they need a lot of electricity, and electricity is a big problem in Taiwan too. So, and also water resources too. Yeah. Okay, that's my comments.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I kind of went over time a little bit because I enjoyed talking to you guys so much. Let's do one Q&A question. How's that? I saw a very interesting one that was sent to us earlier. So the question is, if we have $1, will you invest it to a way of reducing carbon emission or adapting to climate risk? Or how would you divide that dollar? Okay. Who wants to go first? Dr. Burke? You would put $100 into assessment, would you?
Yeah, adaptation, definitely. There are some relatively straightforward steps we can take to improve our resilience. And well, this is the world that I come from, obviously, but recently the Bank of England did a big survey of the climate risk to the financial sector, and the results came out with something like 300 billion losses by 2050. And if you can take very simple steps to know where your risk is and to do something about it, then you can reduce that loss and that financial impact quite drastically, quite quickly. So my choice would be, if I had $1, adaptation, make sure that we are resilient to things that are almost certainly going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Rahul, if you have $1, where would you put it?
I very sadly would agree with Claire. I think the reality is that no matter what we do, there will still be a considerable amount of impact coming, and we need to prepare for it. So I think I would be focused on some of the simple steps that we can make to make ourselves more resilient to that.
Thank you. Dr. Xu, if you have $1.
Okay, I guess if you ask many people on the street or our government official, they probably say 80 on the mitigation, 80 cents on mitigation and 20% on the adaptation, because we have relatively less impact from the natural disaster for the past 3 years. We has been very lucky, but we are not going to be lucky forever. So I would say 50-50, okay, because we rely heavily on our expo. We have to develop to cut emissions as quickly as possible. And in addition to that, I would shift 30% to the adaptation. So if 50 by 50, I would be quite happy. Okay, yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, of course, we all know the right answer is to raise $10 more from Bill Gates, 10 more from Bezos, and 10 more from Branson. Okay, I know earlier when I was introducing the subject, I said that I hope all of our audiences can walk away gleaming with optimism. I'm not quite sure everyone is gleaming with optimism right now, but at the very least, we are more informed about where software and data analysis can help us navigate at the minimum through climate change impact. As for me personally, I am optimistic that human creativity and technology innovation can overcome all the problems that we will face. So thank you to Dr. Burke, to Rahul, to Dr. Su for painting more colors in a portrait for a better tomorrow. Lastly, thank you to AVPN, to Meet Startup, Taiwan Venture Capital Association for supporting this event. To our audiences, if you like our discussion and find it useful, please scan on the QR code that's going to be on your screen to join the discussion. So thank you everyone for attending the Fusion Talk once again. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. We will see you in 2 months.